Hey folks, it's Madison. I'm back with another Halloween card video. So initially I got the inspiration and the majority of the instructions on how to assemble this card from Grassy on Instagram. So shout out to her. I will link her card or instruction video in the description in case you want to reference that while making this. So I started off by cutting two large stitched rectangles out of cardstock. Here I am cutting out a lift the flap and notch element into one of them. Next, I will proceed to line up my second stitched rectangle with the bottom of my flap, and I'm marking off where it hits the top of my other piece of cardstock, and then I will trim it. This will be my pull piece, and I just don't want it jutting out at the top. So yeah, that's the reasoning for that. Then on my main flap piece, I am ink blending my sky using Seedless Preserves, Wilted Violet, and Blueprint Sketch. As you can see, I am only putting the Seedless Preserves not entirely to the bottom. I am leaving some white space near the bottom of this card, as I'm going to go and do some stenciling in with grass later on, so I just wanted to leave some white space for that. Here I am applying the Black Soot Distress ink to the outer edges of my card. I'm just trying to make it look more like a spooky nighttime scene and add some depth to the scene as it is, so yeah. With my sky finished, I am taping my card down to my craft mat, and I am taping my stencil down as well. For this card design, I would recommend having your grass start about a 1/4 inch above your flap. That way, when you add your characters, it looks like they are standing on the ground. Just a tip, I noticed that I didn't push mine up as high enough, and they kind of look like they're floating a little bit, but it's fine. With my grass stencil down, I am coloring in my ground with Black Soot and Hickory Smoke Oxide inks, and then I'm going in with a bit of the Distress Black Soot ink as well, because it is darker than the Oxide for some reason, and it adds more depth and kind of keeps it cohesive. So alright, next I am taking the Cloudy stencil from Fawn as well, and I am adding some clouds to my sky just to add more interest. I thought it was kind of stark or boring in a way, so I thought these clouds would be kind of spooky, kind of fun. So I am using the Black Soot Oxide ink and going over these clouds and then kind of blending it out a little bit, making it a little less harsh using the other colors that I have, such as Wilted Violet and Seedless Preserves. So I thought it would add just a bit more interest, and it looks pretty cool. So, and as I'm using the stencil, I'm rotating the sides to get different cloud shapes, just once again adding more interest. Next, I am doing what I typically do in all of these videos. I am adding splatter to my backgrounds. Here I am using some clean water and a clean paintbrush, and I'm applying that, letting it sit on the card for a few seconds and dabbing it off. The water reacts with the inks because it's all water based, so it removes some of the color, makes it look really cool. Next I am smooshing some Black Soot onto my mat as well, activating that with water and splattering it on. And I'm also using my Gansai Tampi Starry Night watercolors. Again, I'm using more of a red gold here to kind of complement the pinks and stuff in this card, as well as the oranges. Next, I am taking that stitched rectangle that I had trimmed from the beginning of the video, and I am ink blending it with Bluebird Sketch, Wilted Violet, and Black Soot inks, and I am doing the entirety of the piece. I had done a tester card and I didn't do the bottom, but you were still able to see it a little bit when interacting with the card. So if you're doing this, I would recommend just ink blending the entire panel. It looks a lot better. You don't see any little white bits where they shouldn't be. So. And last but not least, to finish off this piece, I am adding some splatter with water. I didn't do a whole bunch of splatter just because I knew I was going to put a sentiment on it later, and I still wanted it to be legible. Alright, so next I am taking my card base and I'm lining up my flat piece, and I'm marking off where that flat piece overlaps or where you can see the card base through the flap. This will help me later with kind of figuring out where to add my inks and where to put my sentiment. So here I am inking up that little space where you will see the window, I suppose, and I am just using the same 3 colors I've been using throughout the entirety of these backgrounds, which is Seedless Preserves, Wilted Violet, and Bluebird Sketch. And I'm just going back and forth with all 3 of those colors to make sure that they're evenly blended and that it's not too harsh. And I'm adding splatter again. I always do it. It just makes it more cohesive with the entirety of everything that's going on in this card. And I am using clean water and black soot for this. Next, I'm preparing my slider piece to be embossed with my powder tool, and I'm using the Little Haunters stamp set, and I'm just taking one of the sentiments that I liked and I'm lining it up. I don't have it right butted up against the top because I have a notch cut out, so I have it just a little bit below the notch, and I will be stamping it with clear embossing ink from Simon Says Stamp, and I'm using a Ranger Fine Detail White embossing powder. Next, I'm embossing on my card base. So I am using a sentiment from the Halloween Fun stamp set from Hello Bluebird. It says, "You're beautiful," or "bootiful," with a little spider. So I will add that as my special little sentiment on the inside. I'm just making sure to kind of keep it lower down. On my first try making one of these cards, I put the sentiment too high up and you couldn't see it when you slid the card. So just as a note when you're doing this, make sure you keep your sentiment lower down. The lower the better, really, just so that you can actually see it when you interact with the card. Next, I am taking my flat piece and I'm going to make it interactive by scoring marks on this. So I'm lining it up on my paper trimmer. I'm lining up the edge of the flap with 1/4 inches, and I'm going to score that line with my bone folder. I'm only scoring the flap. You don't want to score the rest of the card because then you're just going to leave these marks. And next I'm lining up the bottom of the flap and scoring it again at 1.5 inches. Alright, next I am taking all those score marks and I am just folding them down, making them nice and crisp with my bone folder. The first crease that is formed by the die I'll be folding up against the background, and then the next one I am folding down, kind of like an accordion. That is how you're going to want to crease these 3 folds. It'll make sense when you're kind of doing this. With everything creased, I'm going to begin to put together the entirety of my card. So here I am taking an 1/8 inch tape and I'm applying it to the 1/4 inch bottom part. You don't want it anywhere else. And then I'm going to be attaching my sliding piece, lining it up with the bottom of my flap. Next, I am taking some foam tape that I kind of cut in half because it was too thick, and I'm just putting it on all the pieces where the sliding piece isn't. This will keep it propped up on the card and make it easier for you to grab at the sliding mechanism. With my card ready to be attached, I am doing my best to line up my piece onto my card base, and I'm just pressing it down, making sure it's nice and adhered. Next, I am coloring my little trick-or-treater fellas for my card. They are stamped on 110-pound cardstock from Recollections or Micheals. I'm using my Copics to color them, and they are stamped with Gina K, Amalgam ink, and Obsidian. So these images are from Hello Bluebird from the Little Haunters stamp set, and I'm using the coordinating dies to cut them out. And I'm starting off with my little bear, and I'm using E29, E27, and E25 to color him. Next, I am taking those same 3 brown shades and I'm coloring the quills of this hedgehog. I actually googled the term and they are called quills, so a fact free there. I am using the same 3 browns for the majority of the brown components of this card. Just like I typically do with my Copic coloring, is I kind of establish a color palette before I color my images to try to keep everything cohesive, and I try to stick to that color palette as best as I can when I color my little dudes. So yeah. Next, I am coloring the body of my hedgehog using E35, E33, and E31 Copic markers. I am also bringing in R20 later on. I don't believe I show it in the video, but when I do cheeks and like little blushes on all my characters, it's always R20. It's a very good color for that. And I'm bringing back those E30 shades, and I'm coloring my little rabbit dude with them. Here I am adding R20 to the ears, nose, and cheeks, and I'm bringing those E20s back into the pumpkin stem. And now I'm coloring the main pumpkin costume, and I'm using YR18, YR07, YR04, and YR15. I'm using the 15 as the lightest shade as it's kind of yellowy. It doesn't appear that way in terms of numbers. Typically the number that is higher means it's darker, but that doesn't apply to this case. It's fine, it's all good. So I am just going back and forth and using those oranges, layering them, making sure I got a good blend. As you can see here, I'm also using those same oranges on my pumpkin dudes. So yeah. Next, I am coloring the purple components of this card. So that's the little pumpkin pail for my little hedgehog, and then the bear's costume, so his little cape and his mask. For that, I am using V04, 06, and 09 Copic markers. I find they can be kind of hard to blend sometimes, so I am using the tip touch method to try to make the blending a little easier for me. So I find that works really well because the V09 is especially dark. Here I'm bringing Y36 and Y15 as some yellow components for my little jack-o'-lanterns. And now I'm coloring in the little bandages for my hedgehog using N2 and N0. I'm trying to keep them as light as possible, but I still didn't want them to be as stark white. One thing I've done in the past is you can add like splotches of green or purples, for example, and it kind of looks like a really rotten, gross mummy, but that wasn't the kind of vibe I was going for today. I just tried to make him look like he wrapped himself in toilet paper and left the house to go trick-or-treating. So, yeah, I'm also using N4 and N2 on the little galvanized pail for my little bunny dude. And next I'm coloring my little bats. I'm using N9, N7, and N5. I tried to keep it kind of lighter. You don't want your bats so dark you can't see their faces or anything. You don't want to wash out the design, so I tried to keep it a little bit of a darker gray instead of black. So with my images die cut, I am ready to start scene building. So I had trimmed some small little strips of acetate, and here I am putting some Be Creative tape behind my bats and adhering the strips of adhesive or acetate to the backs of my bats. This will allow them to look like they're flying, kind of. I mean, obviously you can see the acetate, but it adds more of an illusion to them in the card design. So there's my little fellas, very exciting. And so I had laid out all my images and I just decided what I wanted my card design to kind of look like. So once I settled on it, I am then gluing my bats behind my trick-or-treaters using the Be Creative tape again, and I'm trimming off the excess acetate from the bottom. With all my bats glued to the backs of the trick-or-treaters, I am going to glue my trick-or-treaters down to the card. When you do this, make sure you are only putting the tape so high. You only want them to be mounted to that little scored section. You don't want them to be glued over those scored sections, because then the mechanism won't be able to move or your images will get wrecked. So I'm just making sure that I'm keeping the glue within the little scored off inch. So yeah. To mount my little dudes to my card, I am using the Be Creative tape because this is moving and I just don't want them to fall off, because then that's no fun. With all my characters glued onto my sliding piece, I I just decided to test the mechanism, make sure nothing was glued incorrectly, and it works, so that's pretty cool. Then I glued on my little pumpkins with some Lawn Fawn liquid glue, just trying to keep them out of the way of the sliding mechanism. Next, I am taking the Halloween party stamp from Hello Bluebird, and I'm adding the phrase "boo" and "spooky" to the sky, as well as some candy to the bottom of the card, just to add more interest and try to fill out the entirety of the card. I also finished it off with adding gel pens and adding some embellishments from Studio Katya. And that was about it for the card. So if you want, you can like, comment, share, subscribe to the channel. It all means so much. And just thank you so much for watching, and have a lovely day, you guys.